This is Brass Check, and we'd like to introduce you to a really worthwhile and valuable news source called sustainablepulse.com. That's sustainablepulse.com. And what they do is keep track of our food supply in a positive way. They have sections on sustainable food, sustainable agriculture. They keep track of real GMO science. And if you're not aware, there is tremendous pressure placed on any scientist anywhere in the world who dares do real research into the health effects of GMOs. The Monsanto and other companies are organized not only to put pressure on these people, but to have them literally driven from the profession of science. And unfortunately, because universities have become so corrupt and so craven that it's not difficult to destroy a scientist's career. So Sustainable Pulse is doing something very important by taking the work of these truly independent scientists and making it available to us. And I'm looking at this on January 11th, 2019, but there'll probably be different stories when you look at it, because you might be listening to this weeks, months, or even years after this is recorded. But let me just show you some of the news items that they cover. This is stuff you'll never see in the mainstream media. And I'm sorry to say you're not going to see it too often in even progressive media. And yet, what's more important than our food supply? And what's more at risk? Here's a story that they're covering. Glyphosate pressure grows on Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, of course, that iconic ice cream company, and they have a group that is basically suing Unilever, which is the real owner of Ben & Jerry's, and they're making claims about their products that say, "Oh, we're good. We're not causing any harm to the environment." Well, it's not true. It turns out that their products have definite traces of Monsanto's Roundup in it, and if you want to play that game, fine, but you shouldn't put on your label that you are not causing any kind of health risk. We all know that glyphosate is dangerous, and you can look that up on. We've had videos about that on Brass Check. Glyphosate is basically the active ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup weed killer. And these genetically modified plants, many of them were designed not because they're more healthy or more nutritious or more sturdy, but because they can adapt to and absorb pretty much infinite amounts of glyphosate. So the one limitation on herbicide, the fact that you would actually kill the crop, has now been removed. So this is a great thing for Monsanto. They can sell more and more of their poisons, and it's a terrible thing for us. The glyphosates get right in the middle of your metabolic processes and completely screw them up. So anyway, somebody is suing Unilever over Ben & Jerry's fraudulent claim, and the court, thank God, refuses to throw the case out. So it's going to go on. Now, here's something really interesting: the evil empire, right? Russia's the evil empire. Got to worry about Russia. We've got to talk about Russia all day and all night. But the European Union, including the countries of Russia, Armenia, and Belarus, has introduced clear GMO labeling on all food and supplement products containing genetically modified organisms starting from last week. Russia's Federal Service for Supervision of Consumer Protection and Welfare announced in 2016 that it was inviting all EU countries to apply a GMO label on the package of food products that contain genetically modified organisms. So here's a case where Russia, the evil empire that's trying to take over America, where they actually have been leading the way in public safety by requiring that foods that have GMO ingredients be labeled. And apparently the Eurasian, I'm sorry, it's not the EU, it's the Eurasian Economic Union. So that's Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, they're going to have proper labeling. I shouldn't have been so optimistic to think that the EU was going to do it, but sometimes I still maintain my optimism. Unfortunately, back in the good old USA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture will not help consumers easily identify food that has been genetically engineered or that contains genetically modified ingredients, according to Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports, God bless them, has been a supporter of mandatory on-package labeling of GMO foods on the ground that consumers have the right to know what is in their food and make informed choices based on what is disclosed on labels. But you know what? The USDA, not so into it. No information is required on the package, and manufacturers can get away with simply providing a QR code and a phone number for consumers to learn more. QR is that weird little graphic that they put on things. So that means you've got to understand what that graphic is. You've got to have a smartphone. You have to take the time to actually, wave your smartphone over the code, and then you have to be able to read and decipher the bullshit that the companies are allowed to post on their food. So you want to know if your food's safe? Better get a smartphone, better be in an area with good internet service, better have a lot of time on your hands, because the USDA doesn't want the label to articulate what's actually in the product. For that, you've got to move to Russia. Maybe that's what they mean when they say, if you don't like it here, move to Russia. Kyrgyzstan Parliament orders that within 10 years, all food grown in the country must be grown on an organic basis. So they've got a 10-year window to sort that out. Hey, maybe it's extreme, maybe it's quixotic, but why not? Why not try? Why not try to do that? Now, interestingly enough, a month ago, China was planning to introduce a maximum residue limit of 200 parts per billion or lower for glyphosates on their imported food products. That would include the soybeans, of which they are massive importers. Now, that was a month ago. Unfortunately, with the so-called trade war, which you can count on as nothing but a smokescreen, they've actually done a deal with the U.S. where they're going to take limitless amounts of U.S. GMO crops in exchange for the U.S. loosening its standards on what it imports from China. And even people in China know that Chinese food manufacturers are simply not trustworthy. But thanks to our government, which is always working hard to protect us, we're going to be getting more Chinese products. My recommendation is, if it's a food product and it says made in China, move on. Look for something else. By the way, France has completely banned, or they're calling for an outright ban of glyphosate. And again, if you search, I'll spell it out for you. It's Glyphosate. And we did have an extended interview with an MIT professor who talks about what these glyphosates do in your system. Okay. What else have they reported on recently? Well, there's more, but let's see. Well, anyway, the site we're talking about is Sustainable Pulse, and it is put together by a group of concerned citizens and scientists. Sustainable Pulse provides the general public with the latest global news on GMOs, sustainable food, and sustainable agriculture from our network of worldwide sources. Sustainable Pulse is also involved in a number of reference projects, all of which have the aim of educating the public on the possible harm caused by GMOs. So Sustainable Pulse supports a sort of a sub-website called GMO Evidence. They also support something called GMO Cerulini, which provides citizens, the media, and scientists with a one-stop resource for information about the research of Professor Giles Eric Cerulini and his colleagues on genetically modified foods and their associated pesticides. They also provide support for the work, to publicize the work of Judy Carman, who talks about, these things come together, the modified foods and the pesticides. And anybody that misses that or fails to disclose that is really pulling your leg. One of the editors of this publication is a guy named Radostin Nonkin, who's from Bulgaria. And another is a guy named Sam Grant. He is the endangered species expert on the Sustainable Pulse and has over 10 years of experience working in the field of endangered species. And there's probably a whole lot of other people, some of whom may be concerned about, making their identities known, because and we've had videos about that on Brass Check. Here's something really important. Here's a story that they have breaking stories. Glyphosate discovered in K through 12 school breakfast foods across America. This came out just a couple of days ago. A new report by the Center of Environmental Health, CEH, found high levels of the toxic weed killer glyphosate in over 70% of the oat-based breakfast foods commonly served in K through 12 schools across the country. So 70%, 7 out of 10, more than 3 out of 5. It is, unfortunately, Roundup is the world's most widely used herbicides, and the reason for that is it's heavily applied to corn, soybean, oats, and hundreds of other crops. This is why it's so important to spend a couple of extra bucks and get organic food, because everything else is pretty much sprayed with Monsanto's herbicides. And they tested 13 popular breakfast foods, and of course low-income children are the most likely to be fed from this supply, and wouldn't you know it, those kids were receiving the highest levels of glyphosate. And let's name some of the companies. They deserve it. Quaker Maple, Brown Sugar Instant Oatmeal, Quaker Old-Fashioned Oats. CEH did not find glyphosate residues in any of the certified organic cereals tested. So according to that test, if you're getting organic, you're not getting glyphosate. Now, glyphosate was identified as a probable human carcinogen in 2015 by the World Health Organization, and California listed it as a chemical known to the state to cause cancer. And let's get a little more deep into this. Glyphosate is also an endocrine disrupting chemical. They interfere with the body's hormone system and therefore have been linked to illnesses like cancer, diabetes, stroke, reproductive problems, and most concerning health issues which can be passed on to future generations. Now, high exposure obviously is dangerous, but what people must understand is that low exposures over a long term, such as the traces that you get from eating food, can be equally as harmful. Now, children are growing, and the EPA, even the EPA, the corrupt EPA, estimates that glyphosate residues in food have increased 4 times in the last 25 years. And children are more likely to be exposed. They're more likely to eat breakfast cereal. And biomonitoring studies have detected it in the urine of 70 to 93% of the entire U.S. population. We have more of it than any other country. Now, there was a ruling against Monsanto where they were ordered to pay a man $289 million Of course, the judge came along and lowered it because they're always looking out for us, lowered it to 78 million. But there you go, because he was handling this toxic chemical as part of his work. So plenty of studies that show that this is a really dangerous substance, and it's completely tied into the GMO scam. People that are promoting GMOs are either idiots or criminals. It's really hard to come to any other conclusion. These GMO crops were designed for one purpose and one purpose only, not to feed the world or save the world or deal with global warming or any of that, but they wanted to create plants that could take infinite, unlimited amounts of Roundup. And they've succeeded. And they've succeeded in convincing the people that rule China to start accepting these crops in greater quantities. So we are creating just a health catastrophe, public health catastrophe of epic proportions. So anyway, if you want to keep up with this stuff, and I think we all should, and we certainly will be doing that, go to sustainablepulse.com. It's a really good source of information. They deserve our attention. They're not even asking. It doesn't seem like they're even asking for help. They're just doing it. But if they ever ask for help, I would say that they probably merit it. Anyway, this is Braschek pointing out one of the good guys, and hope you take some time to go to sustainablepulse.com and check out their good work. Thank you very much.